Hello and welcome back, Leona and Gagan, to this very special episode of Law and Order, the Canadian Workplace Edition. Today, we're going to be talking about how to be effective in communication. We're going to start with asking Leona our first question. So, my first question to you, Leona, what advice do you have for employees around communication?
Hey, thank you for the question. Communications is always such an interesting topic, and it's a very deep topic. It's not just what we say, it's how we say things. And with that in mind, it's important to consider, well, what is important in the Canadian context in terms of communications? What's kind of standard for us here? And generally, it's a blend of being very polite. We're known to be a little bit direct, honest, friendly, but also tactful, and we're known for being diplomatic. So what would this mean for somebody in the workplace? It is something as simple as greeting somebody with a smile and a hello when you first see them in the day. Punctuality is very important for us as well. It sends an important signal. But when we're dealing with people, obviously there's going to be differences of opinions or times when we're going to have to follow up with people. What tends to go best is to give the person the benefit of the doubt, and our conversation should be focused on the work and not the person. So that's one thing that's really quite key here, and that can avoid a lot of conflict and tension being arisen if we could just focus on the task at hand. Eye contact is something that is expected. Not to stare at somebody, but not to avoid eye contact altogether as well. That's considered to be rude here. Touching. We tend not to touch people at work. It might go so far as a handshake. There might be something where we're handing over documents, but by and large, we're not a very touchy-feely kind of work environment, and we really do want to avoid that simply because of our laws. One final point that I would want to make is we want to be very careful with humor. What goes well within our own social circle or within our own home base may not go very well at work. We're in very highly multicultural environments, so we want to be careful that what we're saying is going to land appropriately and not create any divisiveness within the workplace. Most important thing, although we want to be a part of the team, it's always important to remember to be who we are and to bring ourselves to work.
Thank you so much, Leona. I think that was extremely insightful. Let's flip the book. My question to you, Gagan, is please provide some information about the rights of foreign workers with respect to verbal abuse.
Yes, that's a very interesting topic. And we, of course, as things are becoming so complex, this is one sensitivity that we all need to respect at our workplace. And I'm just going to turn a bit more on the legal aspect of this. Now, as a temporary foreign worker program, I'm going to step back to share one of the initial amendments that were done about in September 2022. Now, a temporary foreign worker program allow Canadian employers to hire foreign workers to fill temporary jobs. Now, these programs are regulated through Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, Immigration and Refugee Protection Regulations, and are administered in partnership with Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada, that we know as IRCC, and even by CBSA, Canada Border Services Agency. Now, once the temporary foreign workers are here, they have got their work permit and they are ready to start. That's when Canada becomes extremely clear and strict in their guidelines that the employers are obliged to protect their right and should not be breaching it in any respect. Now, they have same rights and protections as any Canadian citizens and permanent residents. And foreign workers could be here under any mobility program or even any other which allows them to work in Canada. Now, it's very important for the employers to inform temporary workers that their rights in Canada by providing them with the brochures which are easily available online. And these brochures are besides English and French, they are in 6 or 7 different languages. So it's easy for foreign workers to refer these rights online on the IRCC website. Now, we are talking about abuse. This could be, again, as I started this discussion, it is a matter of sensitivity, something that could be funny, as Leona mentioned. It could be funny to me, but it could not be funny to someone else. Now, at workplace, we have a standard that we need to be respectful of, and employers must provide a workplace that is free of abuse. As employer or anyone acting on their behalf cannot abuse a foreign worker physically, sexually, psychologically, financially, or any other ways that are inappropriate or not acceptable. And any behavior that scares, controls, or isolates could also be considered as an abuse. So, some examples of abuse could be physical harm, threats, forcing to work, or unwanted touching, and controlling where you can go, etc. So there could be threats as well. So the list goes on, and again, this is not list that's very, it could be the one that could apply in your situation, and your situation could be completely different. So the bottom line is that if you are at the workplace, you do not feel safe for any kind of a communication that was made orally to you, or by emails, or by letters, or it was whether direct, indirect. These are the instances where you have to be super careful, and you have these foreign workers' rights handy with you. This is obligatory for the employers to provide you right in the beginning when you start your employment. Up to the time, during the time, it should be posted at their premises as well. At any point, an officer makes an audit and comes to your office, the employer is obliged to ensure that this kind of an employment agreement also provided the foreign workers' rights, and they need to maintain that in the HR folder for about 6 years. So a lot is being done. Canada is very sensitive and active on such complaints and such situations. So unfortunately, if you are in this situation, please don't shy away. Reach out to the relevant authorities, and you could speak and get your rights taken care of.
That's extremely important to know for all of us. My next question to Leona: what should employees avoid in their communications at work?
That's an important question, and just to pick up on what Gagan has mentioned, there is certain types of communications that really are not going to be acceptable for us, and I will speak to that first, and that is around anything that's going to be offside of our human rights legislations or our harassment and violence policies. So I'm speaking for the province of Ontario in particular, and so there can't be anything that's considered to be threatening, demeaning, that speaks to somebody for characteristics that really relate to who they are. And that is why I had mentioned it's very important to talk about the work and not the person attached to the work. That's an easy way to avoid all of this. In general, we tend not to favor people who are very highly dramatic, very loud. We also want to be sure that when we are in communications with people, we want to avoid escalations. And a lot of that is in language choice. So it's around speaking to what I feel, what I observed, what I noticed, not what you did, not what you said, not what you intended. So that language becomes important when we're speaking to something. We want to make sure that we're talking about our, how it is for us, not on the other side, to avoid the escalation. It's very important that we also consider that within our laws, it is not the intention of the person who said something or did something, it's how it is perceived. And so this becomes important, so that when we are talking to people, we need to be thinking about how is it going to be for them when they hear it. And I know this is a little bit difficult. We are, particularly accustomed to our own cultures and our own little microcultures within the circles of our friends and family, but we really need to be thinking about how's it going to be on the other side. We don't want to race to the bottom. So regardless of how other people are communicating within the workspace, you yourself want to hold yourself to a higher standard at all times. And that is just because this is who you are. You want to be perceived as professional, as a team player, as somebody that will be collaborative. And, as a result of that, you need to demonstrate what it is that you're looking to receive on the receiving end, in spite of the fact that it doesn't always work out as we would like. So in general, we should really be thinking about making sure that our communications are professional, that we are not engaging in anything that might be considered discriminatory to the other person, and that we're also not doing anything that might be perceived as harassment or violence under our occupational health and safety code.
Thank you for that answer, Leona. Gagan, my question to you is, are there any immigration paths or work permits that such foreign workers can apply for in the case that they have gone through any sort of abuse at work?
Yes, that's an excellent question, because anybody who is temporarily in Canada, they would like to know that if they are losing their employment just because of the abusive environment, what are their next options? What can they do? Where are they? Are they stranded somewhere? Do they have to leave the country immediately? The answer is no. You do have your work permit, which is especially carved out for foreign workers who are victims of abuse. Now, if you are being abused or at a risk of being abused in relation to your job in Canada, you may be eligible for this work permit, which is under Section 207.1 of the Immigration Refugee Protection Regulations. Now, this section states that a work permit may be issued to a foreign worker in Canada if there are reasonable grounds to believe that the foreign national is experiencing or is at risk of experiencing abuse in context with their employment in Canada. Now, and if they also hold a work permit, which was previously a held work permit, a closed one, or they had applied for an extension of work permit, these individuals would be eligible for foreign worker open work permit for vulnerable foreign workers, And these foreign workers also include any unauthorized workers or who have not complied with the employment conditions. Clearly, we see that the government is all in game to protect any abuse of foreign workers in Canada, and it is at the same level that they do it for any Canadian citizens or permanent residents. And now, who could apply? There are some conditions that are laid out that if you are inside Canada, have a valid employer-specific work permit, and you are being abused or at a risk of being abused, then you could be applying for this kind of a work permit. It is an open work permit. There is no filing fee. But of course, as any other applications, you have to support your application sufficiently with evidence, which should include why or what is the kind of abuse that you're facing. You have to provide, or you should be providing, a letter, a statement, or a report from an abuse support organizations, medical doctors, healthcare professionals, especially if you've gone through any abuse which has caused you any psychological issues, or it's not something that you're able to cope up and you need these extra help to perform in your daily routine practices, etc. You could also be providing a sworn affidavit, and again, this affidavit is just as good as saying under oath that whatever you say is true and to the best of your knowledge and understanding. You could also be providing a copy of any official report that you submitted to any of the enforcement agencies. So the list is exhaustive. You could be providing any document that supports you in your situation, and this could help you get an open work permit, but eventually you do have to get onto another work permit that would help you stay or continue to stay in Canada. The objective of such open work permit is only for you to get out of that abusive employment situation. It is not a path for permanent residency. It is not a path for any humanitarian compassionate applications. There are very slim chances that you could be considered under those agency guidelines. Again, this is only for the purpose that you are not going to face those abusive situation at the workplace.
Thank you so much, Gagan. I think that was extremely valuable information for those who may be going through something similar. Now, for those who may not, Leona, sometimes people say thoughtless things at work. How should someone respond to that?
Thank you for the question. Yes, unfortunately, sometimes people do hear things or are on the receiving end of comments that they are not welcoming. So I think first and foremost, if the person is comfortable to do so, they should speak to the person separately, not as part of the group, but pull them aside. And again, the language usage becomes very important. You made a comment about whatever. I was not comfortable when I heard that. I felt it was disrespectful, something along those lines. If you're comfortable to have that conversation, because let's face it, most of us don't get up in the morning and think, how am I going to upset everybody else at work? Generally, that's not the intention for people. However, we will say things from time to time and not realize that we are saying something that's going to be hurtful or offensive to another person. If you feel that you have the ability to engage in that conversation with the person directly, it's important to do so. But what is also important to do is to make a note of the details of what happened and what you did about it. If you did feel to have that conversation with the individual afterwards, this becomes very important. In most cases, we can have one conversation and that should be the end of it. But sometimes, sadly, that is not the case. And in that type of a situation, to be able to have a clear record is going to help you, particularly if, as Gagan was mentioning, you need to switch your work permit to an open work permit. That kind of information will be very helpful to you, rather than just going in and saying, well, this happened and then that happened and then this happened. It makes it very difficult to follow through and do the investigation. You also have the ability to go to speak to your manager, and your manager should be able to help to resolve the situation. One thing that's important to understand is within the province of Ontario, the employer is obligated to start an investigation if there is a complaint of sorts around discriminatory behavior, which comes under the Human Rights Code, or under harassment or workplace violence or workplace sexual harassment. That comes under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So again, keeping the notes is important, but keep in mind, you can speak with the individual directly. You can speak with your manager. If there's a human resources person, you should be able to speak with that person also, but you're not obligated to do that. If you feel for whatever reason that the environment is not very comfortable or the situation was really rather serious and you just do not want to deal with it in the workplace, you can go and file a complaint directly to the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal or through Ministry of Labour, Immigration, Training and Skills Development. These are resources that are a phone call away, but in both cases, they're going to ask you to document the details. In that case, the employer is then going to have to take that forward and demonstrate that they've done an investigation. So it's important to make sure that if something is going that you're not happy with, ideally we would suggest that you address it as quickly as possible. You don't want for it to continue on and for that behavior that's offensive to you to become entrenched. On the other side, there are sometimes where a comment is made and it's humorous the first time, but maybe the third or fourth time it's getting a little bit tired. At that point, you could still pull the person aside. You could say, that was funny the first few times, but I think we need to move on. I'm not really finding it humorous anymore. Now it's feeling a little personal. So it really is a test of your own interpersonal skills. Again, going into those conversations, make sure you're talking about how it's impacting you directly. Don't be accusing. Take good notes and keep in mind that you do have opportunities to move it forward and your job is protected. All of our employment-related laws have protection for the employee if the employee is exercising their rights. And as Gagan had mentioned, the rights of a temporary foreign worker are exactly the same as they are for anybody else who works in Canada. So in other words, we don't discriminate against people for places of origin in how we apply our employment law. So this is one way that we try to be consistent with that.
Speaking of communication at the workplace, my last question to you, Gagan, is I'm sure there have been cases where there was misrepresentation in the case of abuse at workplace. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is picking up from where Leona is heading, that if at workplace you do come through a situation where you have even tried to mitigate the situation, you reached out to the other party asking that this is not something that is acceptable anymore. And then you in spite of that, the things continue at the workplace. You go ahead, you file your complaints. These regulations are so nicely laid down to help each one of us to be safe here in Canada. And with that comes the clause that you cannot be gaming the system. These clauses are meant for you to use it to your safety, to your benefit, but not to take advantage with your situation. So, having said that, in Canada, we are extremely strict about misrepresentation, and the grounds are there are no grounds for innocent mistake. You cannot say that, oh, it was just a misunderstanding, or this was an innocent mistake. I did not mean to have a misrepresentation filed against someone. Having just as a quick background, Section 40 of the Immigration Refugee Protection Act provides that a permanent resident or a foreign national are inadmissible to Canada for directly or indirectly misrepresenting or withholding a material fact relating to a relevant matter that induces or could induce an error in the administration of Canada's immigration laws. Now, the general consequences of misrepresenting is a 5-year ban from entering Canada. And again, because the consequences are so harsh that if there is a finding of misrepresentation, it is going to badly impact your prospects of staying here in Canada. And again, this is also applied equally to permanent residents. Not that you become a permanent resident and you have some free privileges to take advantage of any situations, to game any laws or regulations to take advantage of it. You have to be completely abiding by law. Now, for example, if you are at a workplace and you could mitigate those situations to avoid any harsh consequences, you reach out to your managers, supervisors. But if that has not resolved it, you could then be filing complaints. But any false complaint and taking any other personal vengeance out is something where misrepresentation kicks in, and that's where you actually cannot hide or say that, okay, that situation arose and you were trying to take advantage, or you were trying to take benefit out of the laws or by filing this open work permit for vulnerable people. But when it actually came, there were no real grounds for you to even complain or go far reaching out to the authorities. Now, in misrepresentation, the government says, or the IRCC indicates, that these are various understanding of various grounds of misrepresentation. It is necessary to understand, most important, it is necessary that the misrepresentation be material. A simple inaccuracy is insufficient to result in misrep findings. So only to consider that you're just rushing to come to this conclusion is not going to benefit you. So be very careful when you're initiating this kind of complaint. You should have solid grounds so that when you're proceeding, it should not backfire you. So be very clear on that. A permanent resident can be removed from Canada, or they can lose their status if they commit misrepresentation. You cannot, if IRCC finds that there are grounds of misrepresentation, you cannot simply withdraw your application. That's not going to be an answer. You are still accountable to respond to them and ask them what happened that led you to believe that this kind of an abusive work environment was there. So you have to have real reasons. Misrepresentation could kick in case your complaints were not true and honest, and there was no due diligence done before you went ahead into that other direction. So reach out to any lawyers, etc., that who could guide you well on your rights and to find out whether any abuse or whether you were in any abusive situation. It's always best to take a sound guidance rather than just going by your instincts, because something that you could feel may not be really there. It's a very subjective situation. So always take that extra professional guidance before you plunge into this direction.
Thank you, Gagan and Leona, for having this extremely valuable discussion for all foreign nationals and foreign workers. We will see you both in the next episode. Thank you so much.
Thank you.